We're giving each of the Beck scholars a copy of Cave Minerals of the World and Caves and Karst of the USA, as well as
May I have a picture of you?
we will do a group photo.
Yeah, no, please stay. Yeah, please stay. Okay. Is Heidi here? Heidi Harwick. I saw her earlier. I listened to her talk. Lillian Smith? Uh-huh. And Kyle Compare. Is Kyle here? Here comes Kyle. Now, you may notice that some of us are getting a little gray around the edges and have been at these things for many, many years, but it is incredibly encouraging to see a new generation coming up of people who will pick up and continue the important work of trying to figure out how people can live safely and productively with karst landscapes. And it is not an easy task. It's a challenging task, mainly in my opinion because of the people that are trying to do it. But this is the groups that can solve the problem if anybody can. Anyway, at the risk of stating the obvious, we had 6 scholars this year. I believe that's the most we've ever had in one year. It's close.
We did 7 last time, but it was canceled.
Well, that doesn't count. It didn't happen. But anyway, we are very glad to for that to happen. I'm almost afraid to say it, but please notice the 2 of the winners that are here and 3 of the total are women and 3 are men. That is a very, very good thing in my opinion to pass toward the future. We've come a long way, and we have a long way to go. But we're getting there, I think. Okay? Do you want to start the... Oh, okay, yes. George just reminded me. I just mentioned getting gray around the edges. I have had the great pleasure of working with this group and the previous group for the past several years. Get closer, he says. My wife reminds me that I have a very strange definition of the word retirement, but I am going to try, and we are looking for volunteers to take over to be a new head of the search committee. It's not a very difficult task. It's a very enjoyable task. You get to work with bright young people like this, and if you're interested, please contact either being on the committee or particularly being chair of the committee. Please contact George or me and let us know, and we will pass that on. Okay, 1, 2, 3. George, shall we start drawing? Okay.
So, okay. Each year we have a banquet speaker and a keynote speaker. We try to start out the keynote with a serious, good scientific talk that sets the tone for the conference. But for the banquet, we want something that's a little bit more interesting, if not entertaining. And sometimes the talks can be quite entertaining, not just from the speaker, but also the material and the circumstances presented. As we know, working in Karst can have some interesting situations. So anyway, when we were discussing as a committee, who should we invite? What should we think about, for a conference topic? And I said, I know the guy. We've had a situation in Carlsbad, New Mexico, where NICRI is headquartered, and it's well, you'll hear about it in a minute. I think it was 2008 or 9 when I first met Jim Griswold. It was early on in the project that Jim will be talking about. Jim does not want a long, detailed introduction, but I will say that I've known Jim now for 14, 15 years. It's been a pleasure really working with the guy. I've always been impressed by his keen intellect, his information, his good sense of humor. And until I got his bio, I didn't realize how diverse his background really was. So I wrote some notes. He's worked in thunderstorm research, borehole geophysics, pulse power, numerical modeling, and currently he's the assistant director of the Oil Conservation District of the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, and working as a hydrologist there, and just again doing fabulous work. And this is a fascinating topic. So, Jim, please come on up. We're delighted to have you. I'm a terrible person, so here, put this on, and then just slip this into your pocket.
That's the hope.
You may want to clip it on just to get better sound. Okay.
And then it said, don't put that too deep in my pocket.
Yeah,
Can you guys hear me? Good. Lots of times I don't speak in the mic, but I speak loudly anyway.
the down button is the
Is the forward button.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So thank you, George. Thank you all, especially today with the opening season of baseball that you're all here. I'm Jim Griswold. I work for the Oil Conservation Division within the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department of the state of New Mexico. The Oil Conservation Division, what we refer to as the OCD, is primarily a resource management agency. So we're responsible for oil and gas development in the state of New Mexico, as well as the environmental aspects of the oil and gas industry, with the exception of air quality, for too lengthy a reason. I'm here today to talk about, or this evening to talk about, excuse me, 3 brine wells in southeast New Mexico. Therefore, 3 brine caverns associated with those wells, 2 of which became anthropogenic sinkholes, 1 that did not, I can gladly say. So, if I get it right, we'll start. What is a brine well? It's a solution mining operation for salt. It's that simple. We get regulatory authority under them under the Underground Injection Control Program through the Clean Water Act federally. New Mexico has primacy in the state for UIC wells. It's just simple enough that you drill a well down into a salt layer, start injecting water, dissolving salt, making brine, and off you go. This drawing here, actually from the Kansas Geological Society, shows what we call a 2-well operation. 1 well you inject the fresh water, the other well you produce the brine. You can also do it with a single well, where you inject the water down the tubing and make brine up the annulus between the tubing and the outer casing of the well. Can you hear okay? Oh, I'm sorry. So, why do we need brine in the oil and gas industry? Well, it's perhaps a bit unique to southeast New Mexico and the Permian Basin. It's basically the geology. So this is an absolutely oversimplified geologic profile of southeast New Mexico. If you want a more detailed representation, you can probably talk to Lewis or George, and they do just fine with you on it. So we start with the shallow alluvial layer, where our groundwater typically is. And then we run into the Rosso Formation, which is a mix of shale and anhydrite. Then beneath that is the Salado and Castile formations, which are massive salts and anhydrite layers. Then beneath that are all these wonderful Cambrian rocks that have that good oil and gas in them. So to drill down into those Cambrian formations through that Salado section, if your drilling mud isn't pre-saturated with salt, you lose hole integrity. That's why we need brine. We also use it in workover operations because of its higher density. In fact, it's sold by it's referred to generally as 10-pound brine versus 8.4 pounds per gallon for water, fresh water. And so we use it to mitigate downhole pressures. So that's where the need of it. So why so much in New Mexico that this becomes a problem? Well, let me actually back up there a little. No, this is probably a good slide to show it. So here's the Permian Basin of southeast New Mexico and West Texas. This used to be an old inland sea. And as the water receded back to the Gulf of Mexico, it left behind significant layers of salt, evaporites. As I just mentioned, so you've got to drill through that to get, down to the oil and gas layers. But also in that salt in southeast New Mexico is the nation's only potash reserve, and also the nation's only permanent disposal facility for transuranic waste, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, WIP, down there for that salt layers. So here's the Permian Basin. It's divided into basically two sub-basins and the central platform. The Delaware Basin's more on the western side, the Midland Basin on the eastern side, and the platform in between the two. I should say that that Salado layer, the salt thins out pretty much west of Carlsbad and is near surface, less than 500 feet depth of salt. By the time you proceed over to state line between New Mexico and Texas, the top of salt there is probably 2,000 feet, and the salt section is much thicker. And I'm going to get off on a bit of a tangent now, but someone would probably not forgive me that I work for if I didn't talk about the oil and gas industry in New Mexico right now. So here is a distribution of rig counts in the United States by production basin as late as last week. The blue spike on the far left-hand side, 350 rigs, turning to the left, we say, are all in the Permian Basin, Mexico and Texas, which is more rigs in the Permian than all other basins in the United States combined. This shows a monthly crude oil production from the state of New Mexico since 1981. And so you can see on this graph, for decades, New Mexico cruised along about 5 million barrels of oil a month. Starting about 10 years ago, well, actually a little bit longer than that, this little blip here in 2011 is probably the overall low point. But since that time, we've seen a tenfold increase in production in the state of New Mexico. We're approximately now 2 million barrels a day in the state of New Mexico, which has now put us as the number 2 producing state in the country. We're up there with the U.S. Gulf of Mexico right now. Not the whole Gulf, but at least the U.S. waters part of it. Texas rules over everybody, but a lot of people don't realize that. With the miracle of the Bakken down here, we produce almost twice as much as North Dakota does. Alaska, Oklahoma, California, other places that you typically associate with oil and gas, sorry, New Mexico's number 2. That's great. So, getting back to the brine caverns. So when you inject fresh water in there and mine the salt out, you have a resulting cavern, and it can fail. So what are the factors that lead to failure of these caverns? 3 major factors. How deep is it? Deeper is better. How wide is it? Wider is worse. And then the strength of the roof material. There's kind of a fourth parameter that may get lumped in from time to time is what's in the cavern. So we've got brine in there most of the time, and water's incompressible, so it will hold an unstable roof up until it leaks. Then you'll have a problem. But nonetheless, there was a qualitative study done of failures in salt caverns worldwide that was published in 2008 by the Solution Mining Research Institute, and it came to this rule of thumb conclusion that this ratio of cavern diameter to depth, D over H, if it's less than 2/3, it's probably not going to fall in. Okay? So that's our rule of thumb going in. So I started work for the OCD in April of 2008. I come from an oil and gas background. My father was a mining engineer. My grandfather was a petroleum engineer and an independent producer in Texas. Been around the industry my whole life, but I still didn't know what a brine well was. So a day in July, of 2008, actually I picked up the phone, got a call from one of our brine well operators down there, said he had lost his brine well. And at first I was a bit confused. What do you mean you lost? Do you know where it is? I can tell you where it is. Anyway, so within about 30 seconds, he said, no, it failed on us. This is the result of that failure. And I got to give credit to George Venny from Nickery. He took this picture. He actually convinced the pilot to stand that little plane on its edge while he took a picture out the window, straight down. And so it's actually become a pretty famous picture, I think. I see it all over the world that people have picked up on it, and I doubt if George gets the proper credit or royalties from doing it. But nonetheless, this is day of failure. And it almost looks like, the aliens came down and took a big cookie cutter and stole a piece of the earth. What you see at the bottom of that is actually brine itself that was displaced up when the roof failed. That's probably about 200 feet in diameter at that point. People always ask me how deep it is. I don't know. I'm not really prone to try to go find out on it. But here's a kind of an oblique view, again, thanks to George for taking it. This area of southeastern Mexico basically has no water in it. And so this brine well was a re-entry of an old dry oil and gas well. Now there's a water pipeline that goes from Carlsbad up to a little town called Local Hills. It's the Double Eagle Pipeline, which is the source of water for this operation. And so the main pipeline was up to the north, well, actually north and west. In this photograph, west is up. And there was a duplex pump and a T on it up the road a piece that took water out that pipeline, pumped it down to the well, deep into the ground, dissolved the salt. This was a single well operation, came up the annulus, another pipe takes it over to this pond, and that's where the trucks come and pick it up and leave. When this one failed that morning, it was actually witnessed. And I ran into the fella that was doing the inspection about a week after it happened. So he was up, I guess the normal process was he would start by checking that duplex pump up at the pipeline, and then he would drive down this little two-track road to do the well inspection itself. So he was coming down the road. Something spooked him. He stopped the truck about right in here, left it running, thank goodness, jumped out and saw this fail right in front of him. Hopped back in the truck, put it in reverse, floored it back up the road. Like I say, I ran into him about a week later. He still hadn't slept and was still drinking at that point. So what we ended up doing, and you see here, there's the Eddy County Emergency Response RV, the urban assault vehicle. We basically shut the road down, not knowing how much bigger this thing was going to get, and it would continue to calve for days and weeks thereafter. All the wildlife in the area fled, which is basically snakes, coyotes, and rabbits in this part of the world, out of there. But with the fleeing of the animals came an influx of the looky-loos. Everybody wanted to see what happened. We had folks, since we shut the road down, hop on their ATVs and try to come in over the two tracks. Had the sheriff come in late one night, asked me if he could go over and see it, and I had to tell him no, even though he had a gun on his hip. And so we basically shut that road down for about 3 weeks in that regard. Here's another picture from a few days later, and the brine is now starting to re-infiltrate into the ground. And this is several months later, and I handed to George again. Amazing, he managed to catch the shadow of the airplane right at the bottom of the sink of this one. It's been a while since I've been out there, but the last time I stood on the edge of it, that thing is probably, or at least at that point, was about half full of tumbleweeds. And so I imagine if somebody threw a match in there, it would be a heck of a bonfire. It might go a bit. But one thing you also notice is that, like I say, at this point, the sink itself is probably about 350 feet across, maybe 100 plus feet deep. But we also start seeing these concentric fractures. And these go out, you can see them from the airplane here, but we even see small ones that go out hundreds of feet away from the edge of this thing. Now, I thought it was just the ground trying to kind of heave and head towards the sinkhole. But those who know better than I do tell me, said, no, actually, Jim, that was probably the full extent of that cavern. It was probably morning glory shaped, trumpet shaped. The central core, there was enough height there that you actually got a sink you could see, but it all failed. And that's what you're saying. And almost invariably, when I would go out there and I'd be talking to somebody about it, right beneath my feet, the sand would start to shift a bit and a small crack would appear. Here's a ground level mosaic of some photographs I took of it. Again, you can see those fractures. And here's kind of the scale of some of these things. Like, you know, how deep they are, I'm not really sure. Depth of salt in this area is about 500 feet. So potentially those cracks are that deep. So what are we going to do about it? Put a big fence around it, keep people away. At that point, it was basically considered maybe a one-off. You know, stuff happens. We weren't happy, but we had isolated it and went about our business, pretty much, not thinking too much about it. Well, that didn't last for long. Oh, sorry, jumped ahead a little bit too much. So actually, I'm a native New Mexican, a graduate of New Mexico Tech down in Socorro. They got a pretty good seismology department down there. So we had the event was actually witnessed, so we knew exactly where and when it occurred. Called the department down there. They've got a seismic array of sorts across the state. Said, I can tell you when and where. Did you see it? They said, well, no, but it just so happened at that point, there used to be a system called the U.S. Array, where various geophysical surveys networks were spread across the country, and it just so happened that the seismic network was across the Rocky Mountains. So we tapped into it. And so there's seismographs set on basically a 50-kilometer grid. So what you're seeing here in these two traces are the two closest seismometers to the failure event. The one at the top was just shy of 14 kilometers away. The one at the bottom, 50 kilometers away. This red vertical line you see here is actually when the surface sinkhole appeared. And so you've got about 72 hours of seismic data across here, and it looks like, because we only see it here, that this was the failure event, and the roof started to fail maybe 8 hours before the surface, it daylighted at the surface. And so this one piece of information became important to us actually down the road when I get to the Carlsbad project, and I'll explain it at that point. But we did actually see it. But again, kind of continuing on, we thought, well, maybe this is a one-off. Hopefully it won't happen again. November of the same year. This is in the little town of Local Hills, New Mexico, which is probably only about 30 miles northeast of this first failure at Gems Water Service. This is a produced water disposal facility, and they dispose of produced water simply by putting it in big ponds and letting it evaporate. Anyway, it also had a brine well associated with it that had been plugged in years prior. The operator of the facility, Dick Maloney, had gone into town to get some lunch and was heading back out. And as he approached the facility, he thought he saw a dust devil. But as he approached it, he realized that the wind and the sand wasn't going around, it was going straight up. Oh my gosh, he said, we had another sinkhole failure. So he called the division. Up it opened. So I want to take note of this tank right here. At this point, this is maybe only 100 feet across, maybe even less than that on it. The next slide is what I call the action shot. There's that tank actually falling into the hole that evening. It continuing to grow. And then it starts to eat away at some of the ponds. At this point, it's probably close to 300 feet across. Again, unknown depth. And again, we start seeing these surface fractures in the area around it. We actually had to close this road down for quite some time. Here is a sonar depiction of that cavern, probably about 10 years before it failed. And this is one of the better sonar logs of a brine cavern I've seen, at least in New Mexico. But even it only accounts for about 60% of the mined volume of salt at that time. Okay. Its shape is, we've got bedded salt in southeast New Mexico, not domal salt like you see around the Louisiana coast and such. These are anhydrite layers. Okay. The operator realized they were going to lose their facility. They didn't do something about it. They're actually on state leased surface, and the state land office wanted them to do something with it. So they just started pushing dirt into the hole. They started out with a conveyor belt hanging out over the edge, dumped soil and water into it to self-compact it till they got enough of an edge where they could take a couple of D9 bulldozers and start pushing dirt into it. It took them about a year and cost them about $1 million to backfill it. But at that point now, we've had 2 of them in 8 months. It's no longer a one-off. And so, even though I wasn't that young working with the division, I was still the new guy on the block and not very nimble enough to know to get the heck out of the way. I was assigned, well, Jim, someone needs to get to the bottom of it, and it's going to be you. No good deed goes unpunished. Here's a couple of examples of other anthropogenic sinkholes in southeast New Mexico. This one over in Denver City, Texas, happened almost a year to the day after the Jim's water service collapse. And when a friend of mine actually sent me this photograph, I thought he was just playing with me because it looked so much like it. No, it had happened in Denver City. This is actually known locally as the burning brine well because it was re-entry of an old gas well that was poorly completed. It continued to leak gas even though they were making brine, and so they just flared it all the time. So that's why we refer to it as the burning brine well. This well over here outside of Jown, New Mexico, excuse me, wasn't associated with a brine well, but probably an improperly cased water well down into the Artesian Capitan Aquifer there, where water rose up through that poor cement job, got into the Salado, started mining it away, and eventually it fell. The story on how this one was found, and just take it, this is the way I was heard, how I heard it, excuse me, was the rancher there outside of Jow was missing one of his cows. So he and the wife set out to go find it. And they came across the hole. They thought they heard the cow in there. He had his wife crawl over to the edge and look in to see if the cow was there or not. So don't believe every rancher tough guy story. This is a picture of, and hopefully you guys are aware of this, of the Wink sinks outside Wink, Texas, which is actually probably only about 30 miles away, or excuse me, about maybe 70 miles away from the other 2 collapse sites. And again, this one, the best explanation I've seen of it, again, is a poorly cemented oil and gas well into or passing through an aquifer under pressure, that water getting away from it, mining out salt. Eventually it fails and causes a sink. There are currently 2 sinks in Wink, and there's every indication there's going to be a 3rd at some point. So they haven't controlled that water flow. Oh, and I should say, the water actually in the Wink sink is groundwater. That is fresh water. You see ducks in it. At some point, I'm sure somebody's going to throw some fish in there, and it's going to become McGilligut's pool, and you can go fish in there as well. This is a brine well that failed in McCamey, Texas. And all I know is where it is and that it was a brine well. The Texas Railroad Commission is not so much about sharing information as to what actually happened here. But I think it's probably the same situation. The cavern got too big. So, as part of this effort on my part to get to the bottom of this, I just started reviewing the technical files on every brine well we have permitted in the state of New Mexico. And I just started with permit number 1, and then went to permit number 2, and then went to permit number 3. This is the I&W facility in Carlsbad. It's permit number 9, actually, of the bunch. It was a 2-well facility, originally put in the 1980s. Changed hands several times since then. But you couldn't have located a brine operation a worse place, especially in southeast New Mexico. A failure at this location has an adverse effect on every economic sector in Eddy County. This railhead running across here now transports most of the potash out of the state, along with a fair amount of the crude oil produced in this state, and all the frac sand comes in on that railhead as well. This is Carlsbad Irrigation District's main canal. That's the primary source of agricultural water for $100 million a year worth of agriculture in Eddy County. This road here, US 62180, is what you drive on to go to Carlsbad Caverns. Prior to the recent boom, that was really what was driving Carlsbad, was tourism to the cavern. This other road, US 285, going down to Odison and to Loving, that is a WIP bypass route for taking waste to the WIP site. So like I say, there isn't a sector of the economy down there that wouldn't be adversely affected by a failure at this particular location. Its neighbors are a trailer park, site of all disasters, a church, feed store. This is a dry goods place. Here's a truck stop with underground storage tanks. Just not a good location to be. So how did we end up at I&W? So I was reviewing this stuff, and it's always more than just a few sentences on there. Based on its shallow depth of salt, about 450 feet out there, and its significant production history, it concerned me. So I took my concerns to my immediate supervisor, the environmental bureau chief at that point, and said, look, Wayne, I've got an issue. And he said, well, why don't you hop in the truck and go talk to the operator? So I did. And I came home that evening with my tail between my legs. Silly regulator, you don't know what you're talking about. Get out of our way and stuff. So as part of that review, OCD actually hosted a 2-day seminar in Santa Fe the spring of 2009 to talk about all brine wells in New Mexico. We invited members of the solution mining industry itself, EPA, Sandia Labs, a whole bunch of people that are supposed to know about this. Excuse me. And again, we were there to talk about brine wells in general, but everybody wanted to talk about the I&W facility in particular. All the locals in Carlsbad had already been concerned about this. Most of them have been working out the website. So they actually told me, Jim, no, you are correct in this. We will back you up. And so that was on a Friday evening. Over the weekend, I put together a little white paper for my director, handed it to him on Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, I was doing a presentation to about a dozen cabinet secretaries in New Mexico, the Department of Transportation, Homeland Security, the Environment Department, everybody saying it was a problem on this thing. So one of the similarities between the I&W facility and the two that failed were, again, primarily shallow salt and a large production industry, therefore a big cavern. The difference was, at the other two, there weren't any people. There wasn't any infrastructure other than the brine well itself, and there wasn't any groundwater. That's not the case here. In Carlsbad, depth of shallow groundwater, there's probably less than 70 feet or so out there. So, bucked up your courage again, go down there and tell the operators, no, you got to do something about this. If you don't, we're going to take a compliance action against you. Their response was to take anything and everything of value off the property and file for bankruptcy. Leave the facility as a ward of the state. This is me hung in effigy on their back porch. The local high school football team are the Carlsbad Cavemen, actually, and that's what the Cavemen. And what was saw it, a couple of the workers there. One of them, her name's Lisa. I said, Lisa, that looks absolutely nothing like me. I'm not a caveman with long hair. So she went in the office, got herself one of those little Polaroid cameras, took my picture, printed it out real quick, and hung it on the caveman to be me. But it wasn't but maybe, a month later when I ran into her again, and I caused quite a stir down there in town, and she actually came up and apologized to me. She said, you were worried about, as an employee at I&W, you were worried about our safety. We were going to get killed if this thing fell in. I'm sorry that I did this to you. Nonetheless. So here's kind of looking at this D over H ratio on the two that failed in the I&W facility itself. So you'll see for Jim's Water Service and the local hills situations, They were right at 2/3, if not in excess of it. At this point, didn't know enough about the INW property or project itself that I could really make that. I'm going to back up to the aerial of it. It was, like I say, a two-well operation. Through most of its life, they took fresh water off the city main, injected down what's known as Eugenie number 2, E2 here, which was, they did an uncontrolled frac on it to get communication between it and E1. And they're about 300 feet across. So I said, well, a cavern's got to, at a minimum, be 300 feet through there. And so that's where I get this initial number of 300 to 500 feet out there. So my D over H ratio is at or twice this 2/3 parameter. Okay. So I felt, reasonably justified in the actions that we take. Again, no good deed goes unpunished. Actually, the photograph there was taken by an AP reporter, Susan Montoya Bryant, not too long after the first collapse down there, which she did an interview. Very nice lady, a great article, that kind of stuff. And I guess it got absconded by the National Examiner here. The quote, it would be like a bomb going off in the middle of town, is true. I actually did say that. I just didn't realize I was within earshot of a reporter when I did. So I called Susan up, and actually the little inset photograph is probably George's as well. I called Susan up and said, hey, there's this article in the National Examiner. What the heck's going on? And she said, what? So I showed it to her. So she called up the Examiner, and she raised heck with them because they used her photograph without license on it. And I said, well, what about my reputation? Now I've been in the National Examiner. She said, well, no, buck it up, dude. You were there with Robert Redford. So what are we going to do after the operator decides they're going to flee the scene on us? Well, I've got to figure out if I really know something and try to help the people out here. So what I started with was a bucket of 18-inch rebars and a hand sledgehammer, and started driving rebars in the surface across the property. Spent about $10,000 or $15,000 on a robotic theodolite, and started doing regular surface surveys across the thing while we thought of how we're going to monitor this thing. Now's when we go back to that seismic signature that we saw before. So also we started doing regular surface tilt measurements. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen a tilt meter in a tilt place before, but it's just like a ceramic trivet, and we would glue it to structures out there. Parking bumpers, concrete slabs, and then come along on a regular basis with a small tilt meter, set it on top of it, and do 2-axis tilt measurements, and then see if things change over time. While we were developing what we refer to generally as an early warning system, the heart of that early warning system are borehole tilt meters, and that's what you see over here on this far right-hand picture. These are handmade, one at a time, only after you ask for them. They cost about 10 grand a piece. Extremely sensitive. They can resolve sub-microradian differences in angular deflection. If you remember your high school trigonometry, 360 degrees is 2 pi radians, but a microradian is basically 1-inch deflection in 20 miles. So they're pretty darn sensitive. So initially we had 6 of them put in the ground. We would drill a relatively shallow bore, case it in PVC, suspend the tilt meter in it, then backfill it with playground sands, so it was kind of locked to the casing, and started taking data. And so what you see here is one of the surface installations of that. There was also a couple of existing groundwater monitoring wells. We put some pressure transducers in those just because it was free, cheap data. And piped it all into this command shed here, where we had an on-site computer that would pull the tilt meters every 2 minutes, get their data, and then every 5 minutes, it would take those 2-minute sequences of data and pipe into an off-site server, which would actually compare them to the prior readings to see if there was an alarm condition. And if so, if there was, it would give me a phone call, basically, on my cell phone, and tell me something was up. But it would also eventually had it tied into the Eddy County Emergency Response System. so that it wasn't a human making a call about this. If we got a red alarm condition, which meant 2 tilt meters going off at the same time, not just one because you have an instrument failure on it, they actually built a failure at that location into their county contingency planning, which was shut the roads down, shut the utilities down, shut the canal off, get people out. Okay, so that was the heart of our early warning system, and the premise was based on that seismic signature that hopefully with these tilt meters, we would see something go awry several hours before a surface sinkhole would appear, and so though the infrastructure would be wrecked, we may not kill anybody. So we proceeded on in that way for several years, trying to figure out what to do, paying for all this on the state dime. Eventually, we also included a microseismic system, originally starting with 4 locations, where we drilled holes down to about 600 or 700 feet, put cemented geophones into those, and then here's the surface expression of it, and then had radio links between it and that shed, transferring that seismic data. But it wasn't a real-time system. Somebody had to actually look at the data on a regular basis and make some interpretations of it. But the hope was we could actually triangulate failures in the rock around and above that cavern. Then off we went into what I refer to as the dark arts. Even though I was educated as a physicist and my first job in the oil patch was actually doing borehole geophysics, I still don't trust it all. But so we started with trying to do seismic imaging of that cavern. So we ran actually a limited number of seismic runs, about 4 of them across it. You're seeing the vibra-size unit here, and there's the pickup unit over there. And so the basic results of that was, yeah, there's some disturbance in the subsurface, and this is basically what it looks like. Okay, well, that wasn't good enough. So I'd actually, in 2010 now, we're about a year into the project, state funding ran out for a period of time, and the city of Carlsbad took over. They actually hired my consultant, for them at that point was Respec out of the Dakotas, and Respec convinced them to re-enter the cavern to try to get a sonar log of what the cavern maybe looked like. And so what you see here is what we refer to as a coiled tubing unit. It's typically used to deal with blowout wells, wells that have caught on fire, and you'll sidetrack into it below the surface, pump cement down in there and stop the oil and gas from coming up, and that way put the fire out. But that was used to re-enter that well. When they first did it, and you can actually, this is that first try in July of 2009, excuse me, or 2010. They didn't have what we refer to as a snubbing unit on it, where they could actually control wellhead pressure once they got down into the cavern. Okay, and so they breached the cavern. It took a few hours to drill through the cement and get down into it. But then they decided they were going to do a sonar log, and they wanted to bleed the cavern down to atmospheric pressure before they did that logging. And so I was an observer, and this went on for a few hours, but I had all my instrumentation there. As soon as they started bleeding pressure off, liquid out of the cavern, all the tilt meters started to move. And so this went on for about 4 or 5 hours before even I finally had enough. I said, look, no, we need to stop this. Can't do this. So they agreed, stopped it, demobilized basically several $1 million worth of equipment anyway that might have fallen in the hole. Came back in September that year with the snubbing unit to hold the pressure back, did the sonar logging, a complete failure. You saw a very small cavern at the top of it. Once they got the first anhydrite layer, when I was talking to the driller, he said, Jim, I'm not in an open cavern, but I'm drilling through oatmeal. It's just mush. It's not giving me much resistance, but there's something there. So I drilled down about 100 some odd feet, pulled it out, ran the sonar tube in there, or the sonar log in there, and what we saw was that hole that we drilled. What in the world is going on here? Shouldn't we have run into a big cavern around or someplace? We know it's got to be down there someplace. All this brine came out of the ground. So eventually I got refunded again, off on some other geophysics. Thank goodness to George and Lewis at NICRI were willing to run an IP resistivity survey for us, basically at cost. And so here, actually, you see Lewis there doing his thing. Here's those lines running across the property and out beyond the extents of it. In the next few slides, show the results. Actually, I think Lewis put up this profile this morning, I believe, to show you what I believe was actually that void down in there. Talk to him more about interpretation of it, because again, I'm still not totally convinced about geophysics on it. But basically, there was an area of low resistivity, high conductivity here, the highest, and then these other three little blobs out there, which I think, Lewis, you guys interpreted that as probably some subsurface silty kind of clay that had a variation in the resistivity. Okay. And Sandia National Labs, since they've got an office in Carlsbad, was nice enough to run a microgravity survey out there for it. And so here's a representation of it. There's this large, low gravity anomaly in the center that actually my consultant says, well, no, that's actually representative of a deeper fault in that area. But this is going to come home to roost here in a bit. Okay, but so remember the microgravity part of it. And also another geophysical technique, which is some very old school stuff, known as magnetotellurics. And it's basically running resistivity, but rather than inducing it from the surface with your rods and your batteries, this current is actually induced by solar wind and lightning around the Earth. So the story goes, okay? And so based on that magnetotelluric survey, this was the representation that contractor came up with. So you take all these geophysical methods, you kind of line them up on top of each other, you squint your eyes and decide what you see. That was done. And here's kind of a 3D representation of two of those magnetotelluric profiles. The red is what they call a strong water signal, low resistivity. The blue is a modest water signal, and then a low water signal on it. But overall, the interpretation was that it was just partial dissolution down there. Okay. But nonetheless, it was probably likely going to fail. Oops. So what are we going to do about it? Commissioned a feasibility study of it, and they looked at probably 13, 14 different parameters, things and ways of dealing with it. Most of them fell out and left you with three. One, move everybody away. Fence it off, monitor it, see what happens. Number two, induce a failure and just fill it in from the surface. Too bad for the groundwater, though. It was going to get contaminated with that brine while they're dead. Or the third, try to stabilize the cavern before it fails. So you took those options to the city of Carlsbad and said, well, what do you guys want to do? Well, we like our town, Jim. We would like you to try to stabilize the cavern. So we issued an RFP in late 2017 looking for what we refer to as a design-build contractor, as you would do in a building. Design us a remediation program and implement it. The winner, their conceptualization of how to deal with it was to drill a series of boreholes into the cavern. And remember, they thought that there would be a clear cap of brine, some mixed salt and insolubles down in there. So inject a high mobility grout, replacing the brine in that upper portion of the cavern, basically a new roof. Using the same hose, go down into that rubble pile beneath it, inject a low mobility grout and stabilize it. And in essence, kind of support that new roof you got on it. Estimated cost to pull that off, just shy of $48 million. So now the problem went from being a technical one to being a political one. Where am I going to find $48 million? Start beating the bushes everywhere. Feds wanted nothing to do with it. But after some cajoling, the state legislature, Eddy County, and the city of Carlsbad all managed to chip in, got us enough money to start the project. But the legislature said, Jim, we might love you, we may trust you, but we're not going to give you $50 million to do what you want with it. So they also established what is known as the Carlsbad Brine Well Remediation Authority to oversee our efforts down in Carlsbad. Members of the authority were representatives of my department, of the New Mexico Environment Department, the New Mexico Department of Transportation, the Attorney General's Office, Eddy County, City of Carlsbad, the Carlsbad Irrigation District, everybody that had a stake in here. But now we got a political situation, but and they still exist, to kind of oversee the process going forward. So off we went. Initially, we had to take over 3 other properties in the area to pull this thing off, and that wasn't free. I actually had to pay these guys leases, and in the case of the feed store right next door, we put them out of business, so we basically had to pay them for their business. Several $million. The church was a little bit nicer about leasing their properties, but it was still tens of thousands of dollars a month. This intersection up here, for a period of time, it may still be that, is actually the busiest intersection in the state of New Mexico because of the oil field traffic going through there twice a day. So one of the biggest contributors to the funding actually came from money that would otherwise gone into New Mexico Department of Transportation. Nonetheless, so we lease up these properties, and in the fall of 2019, off we go with 2 drill rigs running simultaneously 24/7 to drill holes into that cavern, starting in the southern area, injecting grout, pulling brine out. Worked pretty well. Here's a bunch of casing sitting on the surface. Here's the mud management unit. You see down there. Here's some brine control tanks. We actually have a large brine pit. Trucks running continually through the property, taking brine away to an SWD for disposal. That's our disposal well. Built a grouting plant on site. Here's some of the operations. This is actually one of the wells. Here's the grout line itself going in. Here's a brine manifold system, hooked up to several wells simultaneously. And there's some automated valves and stuff. You can kind of manage where the brine comes out and hopefully where the grout goes to kind of follow it. Here's the grouting computer basically on it. I just thought it was kind of a nice picture. And so in the southern area, like I say, between October and December of 2019, things seemed to go pretty well. Okay, injected about 5,000 to 6,000 cubic yards of grout. But we were still drilling new holes while we were grouting the ones we already put in there. Well, in December that year, we had progressed into this area here. Suddenly, as we're drilling, we lose weight on bit. The bit falls tens of feet. Gaseous material, since it's just gas, starts coming out of the hole, both air and hydrogen sulfide. What in the heck happened? Well, it turns out the cavern indeed had failed, probably 20 years prior to it. This is the area where most dissolution occurred because that was the freshwater injection point. It just hadn't stoped its way to surface yet. Okay, so we launch off to do some sonar logging of it. I don't know, you tell me if it looks like a duck or a baseball hat or both of it, but nonetheless, close to 100,000 cubic yards of open void down there that we could image with the sonar log. Well, it's not very cost effective to pump 100,000 cubic yards of grout into the ground. I think the total grout budget for the project, conceptually going in, was about 30,000 cubic yards. So we had to make a fast switch from grout to sand. And it just so happens that the cost of implanting a cubic volume or a given fixed volume of sand is about 1/3 it would be for the grout, so we thought, maybe it's going to be a wash. We're going to be able to pull this thing off within budget. Okay? But we weren't quite thinking quite straight about it. So here's that, again, conceptual part. We had lost, maybe 100, 120 feet of roof that had now fallen down to the bottom of it. Well, that rubble pile has got quite a bit of porosity to it. Okay, so but in that, we started injecting sand into it. We see the size, and we measure sonar on a regular basis. We see the size of the cavern, diminishing, but not at the rate that we're putting sand in, because we're losing about 60% of the sand we injected into the porosity in that rubble pile at the bottom. Suddenly, Jim runs out of money. Okay, and so in July of 2020, said, well, don't spend all the money in the bank, but stop injecting. Got to go back to the legislature, hat in hand. I need more cash. God bless them. They came up with it, and in fall of 2021, we started injecting sand again. So between September, when we started that prior fall, and on February 15th of 2022, all the wells met refusal on sand after injecting over 160,000 cubic yards, along with the 6,000 yards, 5,600 yards of grout that had previously been putting in there. $65 million at that point. Demobilized all the contractors from the site. The service has been restored. Turned the properties back over to their rightful owners. Had enough money actually left over at that point to do about 2 years of post-backfill monitoring, which we just started last September down there. We recently have come across kind of news flash. You guys are going to hear it before the legislature is going to hear it. We're actually seeing a bit of potential migration of chloride from the remaining parts of the cavern up into, not into the freshwater aquifer yet, but there's also water in the Russell down there in the Galabra Formation. We've got some monitoring wells completed into it. We think we've got some leakage in there someplace, because we couldn't totally backfill the thing. And the roof will continue to fail, but we're fairly confident now that when it does, if it ever makes its way to surface, it may be just a few centimeters or inches worth of surface subsidence that you're never going to see. And hopefully we've got enough in there to protect that groundwater zone, hopefully, in that regard. As I had mentioned previously, this is now the sweetest piece of earth in the world, Eddy County is, New Mexico, to drill for oil and gas, including the area underneath this brine well. So we had to suspend drilling and completion operations initially within a 5-mile radius of the project, which obviously did not make industry happy in that regard. A lot of money to be made. Since that time, we've actually pulled that back to a mile now. We're in the process of using that microseismic system that we've got. We've now got 10 arrays out there. We see drilling activity in the area. We're probably monitoring. We can triangulate rock failure within this cube of about 4,000 feet on a side. We don't see much happening inside the cube, but we sure see the activities going outside the cube. So eventually, probably we're going to get to the point where people are actually putting laterals and fracking beneath the cavern itself, but that pay is several thousand feet down. Okay, but we'll see. And so here's just my final slide on it. There's your hero, me here, and so my engineering team, Peter Guerra, Dan Kwaczynski, Pascal Lennon from my contractor, WSP, and in the center there is the governor of the great state of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham. So with that, I'll take any questions you guys might want to ask me. Hopefully I can answer. We done, George?
I'll add that the lights going down was the university's hint that they're going to throw us out at some point soon. But we will try
It's
to
9
squeeze
o'clock.
in as many questions as we can.
Timed you perfectly.
What, they said 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes, and then we're heading out.
No fair, Lewis.
So I take it that there's no closure bond requirement for these type of operations in New Mexico?
Well, there is. The USC regulations, in my humble opinion, are woefully inadequate. The financial assurance requirements per regulation are just the cost of plugging the well.
Anybody else have a question?
So what happened to the property where the brine well was, where the folks went bankrupt? Who owns that now?
Well, it's property of the bankruptcy estate, which is basically purgatory. Now that we restored it down there, and Carlsbad being as busy as it is, this property and the adjacent properties to it is actually under they want to build a Lowe's down there right now, trying to consolidate those properties. But I still need the property for a couple more years just to do the monitoring.